apology on my part. Thank you very much for organizing this. And I insisted that I'll not speak. Didn't intend to speak on certain themes. My objective of meeting all of you was to learning kind of research that you have been doing and to draw a lot of insights, a lot of understanding, experiences from the people who have gathered here. But, as you have allotted a particular theme, let me do some justice to that, to speak for a couple of minutes so that it can be taken over by all of you, starting with my friend, brother Jyotirmoy, and so that we can have a very lively discussion. We have been living in a very different time in history. Yesterday there was a discussion, some of you attended, a very interesting book on citizenship written by Professor Anupama Roy, a professor in the Center for Political Studies, who has very consistently writing on citizenship, and we had a very lively discussion yesterday. And in the discussion, I pointed out one thing, that when you talk about citizenship, for that matter any other issue, it is very important that we look at two important issues, two important dimensions. One is the federalism. That federalism, if we are discussing Indian politics, political transitions, political transformation, it is important that we look at the issue of federalism, or we take the issue of federalism very critically, very comprehensively, very seriously. And the other issue which needs to be taken by all social scientists very, very seriously is the political economy. If we do not take political economy seriously, we will not be in a position to understand the kind of politics that we have been witnessing in the current moment in history. And while talking about the transformation of political economy, I was referring to one very important lecture being delivered by Professor Prabhat Patnaik. In fact, I referred to three important works by Professor Prabhat Patnaik, but I started with the lecture that he delivered in the JNU lecture series, Nationalism, JNU, Nationalism lecture series organized by Jawaharlal Nehru University Teachers Association. He delivered a lecture on the theme, two ideas on nationalism. And while talking about two ideas of nationalism, he said that Indian nationalism needs to be distinguished, or it needs to be understood, how does it differ from that of the European nationalism. He insisted that our nationalism was people-centric. It took the people at the core while mobilizing people for the anti-colonial movement, for that matter independence. Therefore, our constitution starts with "we the people." But the European nationalism is basically, wealth-centric. Therefore, that nationalism resulted in kind of colonialism, kind of imperialism that we had seen. Therefore, these distinctions have to be kept in mind when we talk about Indian trajectory, or the trajectory of the Indian Republic. And we need to understand, or we need to examine what is happening right at the moment from the perspective of, or from the very philosophy of nationalism being, understood, being built, being articulated by the leaders of the anti-colonial movement. Even if he didn't refer to, for example, he didn't specifically refer to Hind Swaraj by Gandhi, written in 1909. I think almost all of you have read it. And Gandhi made a lot of distinctions between the European civilization and our nationalism, or European nationalism and our nationalism. I am not insisting that we need to glorify them, we need to exaggerate them, but we need to understand that there are distinctive differences, or differences between European nationalism and our nationalism. However, we also need to keep in mind that there has been a huge transformation, there has been a radical transformation even in the pursuit of our nationalism. In that context, I refer to two important works by Prabhat Patnaik, Whatever Happened to Imperialism, and other essays I think many of you have read. That is a publication of, I think, 94, 95. Then Retreat to Unfreedom, being published in 2002 or 2003, both by Tulika. And Retreat to Unfreedom, I think, is a very, very important and very, very interesting articulation. If you look at Omalendo Guha, Plantaras to Swaraj, meaning that 1947 we have achieved Swaraj. If we take Omalendo Guha and Prabhat Patnaik as a reference point, we have seen in last 70 years, we have seen a transformation or transition from Swaraj to unfreedom. Now, how this unfreedom or the kind of detrimental approaches towards freedom, substantive freedom, has come about, we also need to understand the kind of political economy that, or the kind of transitions and transformations in Indian political economy. Indian political economy, both during the colonial period, anti-colonial movement, or during the moment of achievement of independence, or if you look at the Constituent Assembly debates, the idea was that we'll have fundamental rights, but also we'll have directive principles. In other words, there'll be balance between freedom, individual freedom, and social justice, equity, fraternity, and so on and so forth. But that could be achieved provided we have a kind of economy which is not feudal in nature. Therefore, we started land reforms, and which is not quote unquote capitalist. There will be capitalist endeavors, because we talked about mixed economy, but that has to have orientations towards people's well-being. There have been a lot of debates on it. If you look at Vishnu Prasad Rava, for that matter, a lot of articulations for Northeast India. Even if you look at Jyoti Prasad Agarwala, one of the very important cultural architects of Assam, he had been so critical about the kind of state being built by during this, after the achievement of independence. You must have heard about very important essay written by or a very important lecture delivered by Jyoti Prasad Agarwala, titled Hilpir Prithivi, now being delivered in 1948 in a very important event in Shivsagar, Ahom Sanskritik Honmilan, of which he was the president, and that came out as a very important, very comprehensive lecture. It's a very, very long lecture, and in that lecture also there were some interesting letters being written by Jyoti Prasad Agarwala, Naliapul or Bipod Honket. I will not be elaborating right at the point. He was very, very critical. Even if you look at Lovita, the last act or last drama written by Jyoti Prasad Agarwala, which was also witnessed by the performance, also witnessed by Hemango Vishwas. There you find Jyoti Prasad Agarwala becoming very, very critical even of the Gandhian approach to freedom, or Gandhian approach to freedom's, independence, or for that matter, anti-colonial struggle, and so on and so forth. In this particular essay or particular lecture, Hilpir Prithivi, Jyoti Prasad has said something very interesting. He said that we need to understand that the society that we has been aspiring needs to be understood in terms of culture, Sanskriti. It's a society that that looks for light. Therefore, I was quoting a particular stanza of a song, Joyo Aluko Moy, Onadi Ononto Prokhari, Vishwa Jivana Jyoti, let there be victory of light transcending all boundaries. Now, Jyoti Prasad Agarwala became very critical, that kind of state. Remember, he died in 1951 in January, but he was very critical whether we'll be achieving kind of goals that we have been aspiring through the freedom struggle, through the anti-colonial struggle. And these have been the issues. If you look at Vishnu Prasad Rava, if you look at Naga national question, if you look at the nationality movements in Northeast India, all were critical about all these aspirations being built by the freedom struggle and its articulation or its institutionalization both through the constitution and that of the state building mechanisms, state apparatuses, and the very foundation or the very aspiration of nation building. But despite that, it was believed, and if you look at some people, including Professor Hiren Gohai, when he is looking at Gandhi, he said that, no, we have not understood Gandhi properly. Gandhi's ethical mission, moral mission, despite not having a class outlook, had a lot of potentialities towards transforming the society, which has not been taken very seriously either by the left political forces, even by the Indian state, and so on and so forth. Now, as I have referred to Prabhat Patnaik, let me also tell it that he said that in his Whatever Happened to Imperialism and other essays, he said that the classes, including nascent capitalist forces, Tata, Birla and others, who became part and parcel of the anti-colonial movement, became disillusioned because the people's pressure, people's aspirations became so strong in terms of demanding the fulfillment of their rights, demanding equality, demanding justice. And therefore, in the process, these nascent capitalist forces, including Indian middle class, have gradually abandoned the very constitutional vision, constitutional mission. And all these have culminated in the kind of economy which became very, very oriented towards accumulation and profit, accumulation and profit. And that accumulation and profit had taken institutional turn with the onset of economic reforms in 1991. And all of us more or less know the transformations in the post-1991 economic reforms. I'll give few instances. 1991 economic reforms started. All of you know that was a minority government. Then in 1992, the Babri devolution happened. 2002, we witnessed the Gujarat and the Gujarat violence and whatever you call it. 2014, these forces capturing the state power more comprehensively, trying to penetrate into every domain of our society. Now, it's no longer a government, it has become a regime, it is all encompassing. Now, what I'm trying to, or what I intend to speak is on the regime, current regime. Whether we refer to it or no, we know this is the Hindutva regime. Now, what is this Hindutva regime all about, and how are they building kind of, political articulations, kind of cultural approaches to history, to the economy, or the NEP, National Education Policy, which is coming up, the kind of knowledge mission that they have been trying to pursue. Now, in this particular context, let me also remind you, the whole idea of Hindutva is to bring a bipolarity, polarization. And polarization, remember, has to be, polarization has always been there, but the current moment, the kind of polarization we have been witnessing is like the bipolar world. Now, we are living in a moment which you can call a bipolar nation. Nation is being gradually pushed to be bipolar. Now, it is in this context, it is also important for us to understand that there have been diversity of forces which were, challenging the kind of economy which has come up as a result of the economic reforms, creating dispossession of people, and also kind of centralization of power under the federal polity, or federal polity, quasi-federal polity becoming more and more centralized. If you look at from the perspective of Northeast India, the identity movements was, even if it rallied around the particular identity, culture, or language, history, so on and so forth, but the foundation of all these movements had been the dispossession of land, dispossession of their resources, and so on and so forth. Now, the movements was very, very diverse in nature. Diversity of resistance had been one of the hallmarks of, you can call it, pre-2014, movements in India as a whole. You look at NBA, Narmada Bachao Andolan, you have other ecological movements, you have the women movements, you have the tribal movements, you have the Dalit movements, and so on and so forth. In other words, the regimes or the ruling class was challenged from different vantage points. The ethnic tribal movements from Northeast India were challenging it because there has been growing dispossession through various means, and also use of state mechanisms or state apparatuses to crush down or to crush the people's discontents, people's aspirations, people's rights, people's control over resources, and so on and so forth. Dalit movements became very strong, asserting that this caste system, Varna system, the hierarchical system has to be dismantled, has to be done away with. You had backward classes movements, you have LGBTQ movements, you have women's movements, you have students' movements, you have farmers' movements, so on and so forth. Diversity was one of the very important features of the movements that we had witnessed in 1980s or 1990s, even in the early part of the 21st century. Now, this is a period where the Hindutva forces had also tried their level best to penetrate into the state system, and the foundation was laid down by the process of dispossession. People are becoming quite antagonistic to the political forces which were in power. It created an environment where the Hindutva forces have started articulating in a different way. They have captured the diversity. They have started thinking, they have changed their strategies, and they have started telling that Hindutva is not monolithic. Hindutva itself is a force that accommodates diversity. Now, we witness diversity during this period through the movements. Now, Hindutva has said that we are also accommodating diversity. There have been a lot of writings on that. There's a book called Republic of the Hindutva. If you read it, that had gone deeper into looking at what the RSS has been doing, what the Sangha Parivar has been doing. Now, in case of Northeast India, also the Hindutva has, changed its strategies and it started talking about, and all of you know, the Rainbow Alliance. Rainbow has become the, core reference point, indicating that, we respect diversity of color. We respect diversity of the society, the communities, the aspirations. We are not monolithic. We are not Brahminical. We are different. We are more democratic. We are more inclusive. In the process, all of you know what is happening in Assam, or for that matter, Northeast India, particularly in Assam. They have identified certain groups, particularly the ethnic tribal communities and the tree tribes. If you look at the electoral politics in Northeast India in general, and that of Assam in particular, they have very in a very strategic move, they have penetrated into the communities, tea communities, and the tribal communities. There I use the terminology or the phrase co-opting the indigenous. Now they have done it very carefully, very strategically, and at points compromising with the core, quote unquote, the mainstream agenda, like banning beef. In case of Northeast India, they have been little compromising. They have been little flexible. Dr. Himanta Biswa Sharma and others have said that no, that cannot be an issue in Northeast India. You cannot ban beef, even though they have Cattle Protection Act in case of Assam. But you have, depending on situations, depending on circumstances, depending on communities, they have articulated themselves differently. Now, in the process, why are they talking about diversity? That needs to be understood very clearly. They are talking about diversity. They are talking about a Rainbow Alliance, not because they respect diversity, not because of they are, in the true sense, they are trying to be inclusive, not because they are trying to accommodate everyone. Their whole agenda is to create a bipolarity. Their agenda is to create, polarization between the two, we and the other. I have written an article for the seminar, the research journal or the magazine that comes up every month in October. For the October issue, I have written an article, Muslims and Hindutva politics in Assam, and I had looked at the narratives which have come up. The narratives are very, very bipolar in nature, defining in terms of we and the you or the other. And Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma has now started using certain interesting categories like Ajmal civilization. Now, civilization, all of you know that conflict of civilization given by Samuel Huntington in 94-95 now has been taken to the grassroots to create the bipolarity. And if you look at the recent debates and recent articulations or recent political narratives in Assam and Northeast India, this bipolarity, the polarization between two means the we, the Hindus. Hindus doesn't necessarily mean the upper caste Hindus. Hindus also mean all these tribal communities or even the indigenous Muslims. All of you know that the state government of Assam has started new schemes for indigenous Muslims or Assamese Muslims in the state. So this whole bipolarity, I think the polarization is a very, very meticulous, systematic, cunning, significant strategy on the part of the current regime. But remember, they cannot do only through narratives. Therefore, they have also indulged in what I call selling dreams, dream sellers economy. Remember, I told you that all these have been happening in a particular historical context, in the context of changing nature of the political economy, both at the global level and also at the national level. Remember, this regime, there are both continuities and discontinuities. This regime has made, populist schemes very hyper. Everywhere you have so many populist schemes. You have scheme, one or the other scheme for everyone. They are not talking in terms of making people capable of earning their livelihood. They are creating a situation where citizens become dependent or dependent citizenry. You can call them subject. I'm not using subject, but then dependent citizenry or dependent citizens have also become one of the important strategies on the part of the current regime. That was happening earlier also, but they had different orientations. Look at Food Security Act, look at Right to Forest Act, look at NREGA, look at Right to Information. All those were product or outcome of people's movements. Now the state was forced to adopt the strategies or the visions of the people, enacting them into act. Right to Education Act, Right to Food Act, Forest Rights Act, then Right to Information Act, NREGA, and so many. But this current regime are not talking in terms of right, remember. They are talking in terms of giving, FIBIs or giving lot of beneficiary schemes to every community, every section of the society. They are not looking at, or they are not trying to discriminate there. They are trying to reach out everyone. The idea is to make the common citizens dependent on the government. I call them dream sellers economy. So they are doing two things parallelly. One is selling dreams, creating dream sellers economy. On the other hand, trying to create bipolarity or create polarization. The kind of narratives those have come up. I'll not speak comprehensively on that. It has gone so deep. It has gone, it has become so comprehensive. At every level, they are trying to create, hate narratives. At the same time, they are also pursuing these populist regimes. It is in this context what happened to people's substantive rights, identity movements, which became so strong. And remember, these identity movements also created confederation, particularly during the anti-dam movements. If you look at anti-dam movement, 2005, 2006 onward, Krikhak Mukti Hongram Committee became a very active agency in this regard, mobilized all these groups, all these communities, ethnic tribal communities to be part and parcel of it. Even also Students' Union became part of it, NESO became part of it, different organizations of different states in Northeast India became part of it, and resource ownership has become emerged as one of the very important issues, particularly in the first decade of the 21st century. An anti-colonial movement, anti-dam movement becoming a symbol of it. Remember, Narmada Bachao Andolan, which has been there for quite a long time, we didn't have a connection with Narmada Bachao Andolan. Medha Patka didn't come to Northeast India. I think even if she came, that was not that prominent. But by 2007, 2008, Medha Patkar and others also started visiting Northeast India. The whole idea is that these ecological movements, it's people's movements regarding their demand of having control over resources needs up. I think that was the achievement of these movements. Now these movements started talking about not only about environmental assessment. All of you know that in the development projects, for that matter, river dams, large river dams, one of the strategies which was developed to mitigate or to address the discontents of the people was the environmental assessment. But these movements had gone deeper, and movements had started talking that environmental assessment is not enough. We have to talk about cumulative impact assessment. Cumulative impact assessment from EIA to CIA. Cumulative impact assessment. Now, cumulative impact assessment has been a very innovative idea, telling that when you are doing some development projects, not necessarily you are looking at environment in a narrow sense of the term, but you are looking at the ecology. You need to look at very composition of the soil. You need to look at the composition of the hills. You need to look at the the flow of the rivers. You need to understand the people's connection with the rivers, or the cultures around rivers, and so on and so forth. You also need to look at the communities which live on, who earns their livelihoods from the rivers. Therefore, this cumulative impact assessment, one of the very important parameters of the social movements in the first decade of the 21st century. And the tribal movements, ethnic movements played a very important role in this regard. Therefore, there was also a transition. The ethnic movements were basically talking about the identity, and at points identities became very obsessive in nature, and there were a lot of inter-conflicts. But with these articulations that we need to talk about resource control, and now we need to talk about land, river, forest, and so on and so forth, and also about sustainability of the ecology. And in this context, if these movements or these identity groups do not have certain kind of federations, we are not be in a position to defeat those forces which are driving towards appropriation of resources. Remember, anti-APSPA movement also became very strong at this point. Now, the current regime or Hindutva regime has also been reading these things very carefully, very categorically. If you allow these movements to talk about cumulative impact assessment, if you allow these movements to talk about resource control, what will happen to the kind of economic agenda, the kind of populist agenda, somebody calls it rentiers economy, kind of economy that you have been developing, what will happen to that? Therefore, one of the important agendas in case of Northeast India has been co-opting the indigenous. You co-opt, if necessary, you create lot of conflicts or lot of divisions within this community, but try to co-opt the mainstream or the mainstream elite class into the state system. I think that's a very interesting thing, or that's a very important thing which is happening in Northeast India. I'll give you a couple of examples, then I'll stop here. Remember, 2016 assembly elections take place in Assam in April, and in May, the BJP-led NDA government came to power. Now, in September 2015, something very important, very extraordinary was happening in the state of Assam. But before that, in 1993, when the BTC Accord was signed, it required, because that granted, territorial autonomy to the Plain tribe. That was not the case earlier, because only hill tribes were given autonomous councils under 6th schedule. Now, when there was a debate on the amendment to the constitution to give 6th schedule status to the Bodos, the Plain tribal community, there was a conflict between two tribal leaders from Assam. One is from the hills and other is from the plains. Sansuma Kungur Basumatari, he was representing the Kukraja constituency, and he is from the plains, and that of Dr. Joyanto Rongpi from the hills. Because in that whole BTC Accord, there was also an assurance that Bodos living in the hills will also be given tribal status. There were a lot of debates, hill tribe status, and so on and so forth. There were a lot of conflicts, a lot of debates, a lot of arguments between two important public representatives, two tribal, remember, one representing the hill and one representing the plains. There was a debate on that. 2015, something was happening extraordinary. I think UPP, United People, UPF, all these tribal leaders from the hills and the plains came together, and they formed a platform called UPF, United People's Front. And they said it categorically that this UPF will maintain, their distance both from the Congress and the BJP. And that was a very important signal that these tribal communities, who are talking in terms of, resource control, may become very strong, because these movements are weak because they don't have unity. There have been a lot of conflicts. Now, in that particular, convention, all leaders, Joyanto Rongpi, Hagrama Mohilari, Holiram Terang, Aditya Khaklari, Ronos Pegu, Tonkeshwar Rava, representing different communities came together. 2016, when BJP was preparing for the Assam election, in January, I think 13th or 14th, I don't remember, the first alliance of BJP happened with the BPF, Bodo People's Front. Hagrama Mohilari was there in Delhi, to talk about or to finalize the agreement or to finalize their alliance with BJP. And the first political rally or the political campaign, or the campaign rally, whatever you call election rally, by BJP, addressed by the Prime Minister, did not take place in Gauhati, was not under the banner of BJP. It was under the banner of BPF, and it took place in Kukrasar. I am telling you all these things to remind ourselves their strategies. In the process, we know what has been happening. All these movements, particularly mainstream leaders, who have gradually been co-opted. They have not been talking about the substantive issues, right over land, right over resources, right over the ownership over the development process, and so on and so forth. It is happening not only with these groups, but also with the groups who has otherwise been aspiring to have the status of the ST, to have the ST status. Look at the Morans, Motoks, and other communities. They have also been gradually co-opted by this regime, and this has created a lot of opportunities for them and a lot of challenges for the region as a whole. We have been hearing that commissioning of the Lower Subansiri hydropower project is going to happen very shortly. We are not hearing about what is happening in the Dibang Valley project or Siang Valley project. There were some PILs pending in Gauhati High Court. Probably those have been disposed of because the movement groups were not in a position to pursue them, and so on and so forth. And remember, look at Assam Legislative Assembly and the ministry in Assam. Both the speaker and the deputy speaker are from the tribal community. remember? And none other than education minister is also from a tribal community who otherwise had pursued left ideology for quite a long time. And they have become ally of this regime, thereby weakening these movements which had otherwise been demanding substantive rights. During the JPC, Joint Parliamentary Committee hearings, remember, CAB, the movements against CAB started in Northeast India. That was, it was Assam and other states of Northeast India which took the initiative. Remember, if you look at the JPC report, Joint Parliamentary Committee report, 470 pages or so, if you see the report, who had given so many memorandums, who had come to meet the JPC, it's mostly the ethnic tribal organizations of Northeast India. And all of you know how has it been mitigated or how has it been negotiated with by exempting 6 hill areas and inner line permit areas from the purview of CAA, and that has weakened the anti-car movement in Northeast India. And all these helped them to move ahead with the agenda of we and the other, or to move ahead with the agenda of civilizational conflict. So I'll stop here, and I'll expect almost all of you will contribute, contradict, contest, and challenge whatever I have presented before you. Thank you very much.